This evening we want to give thanks for families. We have to ask the question, who is rich who does not have family? I have noted many times in funeral eulogies, even of the rich and the famous, those who may have made their name and made their mark in this world, that it all boils down, no matter what other accomplishment they have made in the world, the usual and the most important remark is that he or she was a family man or woman, a devoted family man or a devoted mother. That is the highest and the most important characteristic and compliment that can ever be paid to one at the end of life. And while some may complain that they haven't accomplished much else in life, to be a husband, a wife, a godly husband and wife is thereby accomplishing much. To feel that is to miss much. And I think that we too often take it for granted how God, in His wisdom, has ordained family. And we assume it, and we enjoy so many blessings from it. But do we ever just take stock of what God has ordained and what God has privileged us with when He created the family unit? Now this Psalm 128 is really the commentary of the family man. Blessed is everyone that feareth the Lord, that walketh in His ways. In verse 3, thy wife shall be as a fruitful vine. And then verse 6, yea, thou shalt see thy children's children, and peace upon Israel. So therefore we can say that God is the God of families as creator. And a few weeks back we took note how in creation God made the very first parents in this world male and female. He took that rib out of Adam's side when He said it was not good for Adam to be alone. And He created Ish'ah. That's the Hebrew word for woman. The Hebrew word for man is Ish. And the Ish'ah is the other half, the better half, we better say, here in this life. And when God created man and wife, He had a perfect plan in mind. And by populating the whole world from one family, we have to acknowledge God has done an amazing thing. We see this too by the patriarchs as you read through the Bible. There are a good number of patriarchs who are the heads of families, and their descendants become the instruments of God and the power of blessing and good in the world. We also have to recognize that it is by family that God governs society. And wherever there are strong, wholesome families, well governed, well cared for, well provided for, there you will have a strong society. And wherever that is undone, there is chaos and there is anarchy. Now in these times, when the family is threatened by neglect and by rebellion to God's order in society, it is a good thing for us to renew our appreciation for the family. Because if the family ends, society will end as we know it. Indeed, we would argue that society will cease to function at all. It will fall into misery, loneliness, disease, bitterness, harshness will become the lot of nations. And so therefore family is ordained of God for protection, for peace, for love and contentment, even in this fallen world, where there is so much misery, where there is so much trouble and care. God has ordained the family to be His way, to be pilgrims through this world. Now we just want to look at this in a few areas this evening. God has ordained family, first of all, for companionship. We learned that God said in that work in Genesis when He created Adam that it is not good for man to be alone. And God has created us, created mankind as a social being. We are not made to be loners. We are given the gift of society to desire companionship and friendship. And one of the great evidences of that is God has given to us as humans the gift of speech. This is something that the animal world does not have. But we are given the gift of speech, the ability to communicate our thoughts, our desires, and even our emotions to one another. And that's a gift from God. God has given us this gift of speech to communicate. Now that, taken at a higher plane, it is something that God has given us for fellowship with Him, by which we can walk with Him and talk with Him. We can live in sweet harmony and communion with our God, because He has given to us this gift of speech. And God can speak to us and communicate His heart, communicate His love and His grace to our souls. And when God created us and created mankind, He created us with this ability to love and to be loved. And so therefore loneliness is a great problem in the world. Now statistics today show that more and more people live alone than ever before in the history of the world. Young people go off from their homes and end up living all alone. Marriages break up, and it leads to dysfunction, and to deep depression. And indeed today, depression is at an all-time high. And in our society, even when we more and more are city dwellers, living in higher density environments, yet loneliness is becoming a greater issue and problem. The Christian home, marriage and family is God's plan. Now wives often complain, my husband is never home enough. I don't know any wife that doesn't have that complaint to some degree or other. And she is usually depressed, annoyed, disturbed, to the point of deep frustration. My husband's hardly ever here, or is not home as much as I would like. And their complaint is often justified. But still, they might not be at peace if their husband was only gone a little bit. They would still complain, my husband is not at home enough. But wives, let me give you this counsel. Be thankful that your husband does come home. Now, I'm not speaking about the husband that spends all his free time in some pursuit that is totally ridiculous and unnecessary. There are husbands that, due to providing for the home, works long hours out of the home. In these days, commuting to and from work also takes time. And for most men, it's 5 days a week at least, long hours away from home. Early morning to reasonably late in the evening, they are gone from home. But wives, be thankful that your husband does come home. There are widows who have no husband at all. I want to share with you my heart here. My mother was widowed at the age 42. There was a day when my dad went off on a visit with my uncle, and he never came home alive. Indeed, we carried his casket into our home and to his funeral. And for 34 years now, my mother has lived as a widow, without the companionship of my father and her husband. Wives, pray that you never have to endure years and years of widowhood. It is very, very difficult. And that is why the Bible gives a very special place and special instruction that we are to care for the widow. And we're always to take note of those, because the companionship of marriage is blessed. Troubles are shared. There is the joy of a good talk. To know someone with the confidence that you can even know each other thinking is very special. And it can hardly be found outside the family unit and the marriage bond. Now, men, just because your wife has the art of knowing you thinking does not mean that you stop talking to her. And I'm sure it will often be the complaint of your wife, "Why won't you talk to me?" And when we get to the duties of husbands, which will come in this series along the way, we will find that this art of communication, this ability to share your day, your life, your heart with your wife, is a very, very necessary thing. Your wife should never feel that she is shut out of your life. And she should always feel that there is an openness and a willingness to share the experiences of life. And we should give thanks here this evening for the blessing of a companion in life. If you had riches and no friendship, if you had fame and accomplishments but no friendship, you would be poor and miserable. And we know of millionaires, we know of superstars who drive themselves to despair because their home life is a wreck, their marriage is in ruins. But this is to be building on the very Bible principle that two shall be one. One flesh, one family unit, one complete building block in society. And so therefore we do well to give thanks to the Lord today for the blessedness of companionship that we have in our marriage, in our families, in our homes. And young people, you thank the Lord that you are blessed by being born into a loving, wholesome, and I trust, a happy family unit. And you might say to me, "But my home is not a perfect home. My home is not always happy. And I'm growing up as a young person and things are difficult for me." Let me tell you something. You know absolutely nothing of the misery of growing up in a home where there is brokenness and dysfunction, as in the world of drugs and alcohol and vice and wickedness. And I think I know the families in this congregation well enough that every young person in this church is growing up with privileges and benefits that there's young people in this world know nothing of. And we have every reason to give thanks to the Lord. When I was a young teenager, we had a family friend. It wasn't a blood relation or family relation, but he was a family friend. He was a painter. And if in our family some painting needed to be done on the farm or on the farmhouse, they would have employed this man. But he was a drunkard. He took to alcohol, and it just ruined him. It ruined his family. It ruined his business. It ruined everything. And it brought untold misery. And we tonight have to thank God for what the gospel has done in sparing us. So, companionship. That's the first thing that we ought to praise the Lord for. Secondly, the family is God's plan for children. Now you'll notice in creation, of course, that God's plan was to populate the whole world from one set of parents. Can you imagine that? Just think of it. Everybody's in the world today, whether they be Chinese, Vietnamese, whether they be Thai, Cambodian, Russian, native North American, Aztec peoples from South America, white, Norwegian, Anglo-Sax, whatever your heritage, we all come from Father Adam and Mother Eve. From two parents, this world has been populated. And just think about how amazing it is that from two parents come forth a complete new human being. And just stop to think that you are the product of the union of a husband and wife. And God, in His brilliant scientific manner, by the laws of biology, through the female and the male chromosomes and the DNA blueprint, produces a complete, whole, independent, new human being with features like mother and features like father, personality, character, like parents, and yet with some differences. And you remember what Ecclesiastes asked, how can the bones be formed in the womb? And what a wonder this is. And then there's even a greater wonder, a wonder that has put the theologians to debate. How can, through the conception of a child in the womb, be the production of an eternal soul? A soul that will live as long as God lives in all eternity. That's an amazing and a wonderful thing. And back here in the Psalm 128 verse 3, thy wife shall be as a fruitful vine by thy sides of thine house, thy children like olive plants round about thy table. And then back in Psalm 127 verse 3, lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb His reward. So children are the gifts of God, the reward of God, and as parents we are entrusted with the care, the training, and the preparation of a life to live for God's glory. And just think about it. What is the value of a child? What's the value of a child? We know of parents who, when a child becomes ill and needs medical attention, they are willing and have actually done so. They have sold every possession they have that they might see their child healed, attended to, cared for, because their child is worth more than material things. Now, I have to say that I learned that lesson this week, because on Tuesday morning I got a phone call to say that Calvin and Lloyd were in a car accident. And when you're far away from home and you get news like that, when you hear those words, all kinds of pictures come into your mind. And of course my first question was, are they all right? Now I can honestly say I didn't ask, is my car all right? I asked, are they all right? And I was certainly glad to find out that while they were shook up from the accident, that they were physically unharmed. That sling that Lloyd is wearing is a separate accident they had at school on the same day. He went on to school after that and was playing football and ended up getting done in by a few guys playing football. So this week was not the Goligher week. And my car, well, ICBC has the last word on that one. And I haven't even seen the car, but I'm told that it's curtains. It's all over. The car's right off. So I can only give the Lord the praise. And as I was at the week of prayer, I thank the Lord that while my car is over, maybe may never see it again, that Calvin and Lloyd are well. And it's then that you begin to realize that children, whatever stage they're at, and even though they take the keys of your car, with your permission, yes, and they end up writing it off, they're still worth more than the car. Still worth more than material things. What is the value of a child? And you'll notice that even grandchildren, it doesn't end there. It's not just when we have children under our roof and under our care. Look at verse 6. Yea, thou shalt see thy children's children. And as children grow up and make their way in the world, and as they live for the Lord, they are the most precious thing above all that we have in this life. And so we are further blessed to see them blessed. And this family is God's plan for children. And who is rich? Who is rich that has not been blessed with children? Then lastly, I would say that the family is God's plan for conversion. And I'd like to share a verse with you over in the book of Acts, chapter 2, verse 39. This is the preaching of Peter. Peter on the day of Pentecost, and the promise that he pleads and he claims. Acts 2, verse 39. Men and brethren, let me, where am I at here? 2:39. For the promise is unto you, and to your children, and to all that are afar off, even as many as the Lord our God shall call. And this brings us to a truth that we find in the Bible, that God is often pleased to work in the lines of family to save His people and build His church. Now, firstly, we should thank God for a converted spouse. We should thank the Lord for a partner, a husband, a wife, who truly knows and loves the Lord. And you may be familiar with passages in the Bible that addresses wives whose husbands are not converted, and how they are to conduct themselves. And we understand how difficult it can be when there is one husband or wife, a Christian, and the other husband or wife is unsaved and worldly. And we know of Christian wives who were not allowed to read the Bible, even in the presence of their husbands or the children in the home. They were forbidden to read the book. Or you have Christian wives who want to go to church, and they want to bring the children to Sunday school, but an ungodly husband says, no way. And it can become very difficult, exceedingly difficult, in a spiritually divided home like that. And the point I'm trying to make is that if your husband, your wife, is a Christian, and you are united in the Lord, you have so much for which to thank the Lord. But you might say to me, but my husband's not a very good Christian. Or my wife is not a very good Christian. She's very immature, very young in the faith, and doesn't seem to be all that excited about the things of God. And you may say, I'm living with someone that's very imperfect as a Christian. Let's realize something. As husband and wives, you know your spouse, every weak point, every failure, every little annoyance, you know every one of them. And your spouse knows them too. And we have to realize we're not married to a perfect Christian. But that doesn't mean that we begin to question and we begin to deny the grace that God has already begun to work in the heart. This week, at our week of prayer, the Reverend Fletcher preached on Wednesday morning, preaching to ministers and elders, to young men who also are going out to pastor churches. And he preached on Corinthians chapter 1:4, which speaks about, I thank God for the grace of God that is in you. He began by saying, look, think of the Christians that were at Corinth. They were divisive, they were argumentative, they were rebellious. Some of them were impure. They were fallen into error of various kinds. And Paul began his letter to the Corinthians, who said, I thank my God for the grace of God that is in you. And we have to recognize even that spark of grace, even that tiny desire for the things of God. The very fact that your husband or wife will come to church with you. The very fact that they will open the Bible and pray. The very fact that they will give you liberty to walk with the Lord and talk of the Lord. All of those things is God's grace. Now you may say, I would like to see more. Of course we would want to see more. We'd want to be married to a spiritual giant, wouldn't we? We'd want to be married to someone who would be a great colossus of spiritual power. But those are far and few between in this world. And God, in His great mercy and His goodness, He deals with us all when we're just spiritual children, when we're weak and feeble. And you might be married to someone that you consider weak and feeble, spiritually. But you ought to thank the Lord that there is the spark, the very first signs of new life. And now comes your challenge. Either a husband or a wife, your challenge is to stoke the fire. It is to encourage that new life. It is to pray and minister and so live and so walk and so talk in the presence of your wife or your husband that you will be a means to see them blossom in the things of God. Not to discourage. Not to cut down. But to encourage and to strengthen. And the wonderful thing is that it so often pleases God to save both husband and wife. And it so often pleases the Lord to save and convert children in the family. So often. That's not my car, by the way. By no means. I can be excused from this one. It is dead, so that can't be my car. At our presbytery this week, our student minister, Dyke Habiger, whom you may know was in Liberia already once, and he's going back now for his second visit, and has been praying about the call of God in his life. He's been through our seminary. He's been helping in the church in Malvern, Pennsylvania, and he reported that he had been praying about the will of God, and he felt that his heart was leaning more toward Liberia. Now, the door is not completely open for him to go there, but our presbytery felt it was time for him to be licensed. Now, that simply means that he signs the doctrine of our church and that he will minister under the care and direction of our denomination. Now, present in our presbytery was his grandfather. His name is Dr. Goligher from our church in Greenville. He's the music minister in our Greenville church. Now, you can imagine the emotion for him as he saw his grandson answer questions and step forward to be licensed as a preacher of the gospel. And then the Reverend Mook, our moderator, prayed the licensing prayer. And as he stepped forward from that, his grandfather stood up from his seat and gave him a great big hug. And I could see the tears were flowing. Afterward, I spoke to this Dr. Goligher and I congratulated him, and I said it was a delight to see his grandson go forth to preach the gospel. And he said, "Did you know what he said to me?" He said, "I'm here because of you." And it told me something of the story, that there was a very close relationship in his growing up years with his grandmother and his grandfather. And certainly through his prayers and through his example, his grandson today is a preacher of the gospel through his life and example. All to say that God is often pleased to work through families. That's the goodness of God. That's how God has so designed it. And the Lord has given us many promises, and I have a number of them quote here. Isaiah 54:13, Isaiah 59:21. You can take those promises to heart to pray for your children and your grandchildren, spoken of here as thy children's children, and peace upon Israel. And so this makes it a great thing to be a Christian. This makes it a great thing to be establishing a Christian home. A home where the Lord Jesus is in the midst. And there is nothing more glorifying to God on earth than a Christian family where every member is living to his honor. A home like that of Joshua, where it is truly said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." We will serve the Lord. And in a couple of weeks, I hope to be speaking on the duties of husbands, the duties of wives. But next week, the subject needs to be, when are you ready for marriage? That's going to be the big subject next Sunday evening, Lord willing. Will you pray that the Lord will guide in that and help in that for next Sunday evening, and make that a matter of prayer through this week?